Words move, music moves, only in time. But that which is only living can only die. Words, after speech, reach into the silence. Only by the form, the pattern, can words or music reach the stillness, as a Chinese jar still moves perpetually in its stillness. The Orcadian poet George Mackay Brown said of T.S. Eliot that he wrote poems of incandescent beauty. And I think that's a good starting point for my talk today, because it's the beauty of the poetry that strikes one first about Eliot, long before we begin to understand it. And Eliot is often difficult to understand. So I think it's important first to listen and to enjoy the poetry without worrying too much about what it means. That can come later. And anyway, the meaning is bound up with that haunting beauty we encounter in Eliot. So today we're going to hear a fair amount of poetry and also, I hope, gain a little understanding. Let me confess that I fell in love with Eliot's poetry long ago, and I never lost this love. But there was much about it that baffled me. One mystery was, why is the series of poems, the four quartets, called this? To be sure, there are 4 poems, so 4 is right, but why quartets when each is divided into 5 sections or movements? None of the books I read seemed to answer this question. And then finally, I got it. The whole poem is named after a musical quartet, a composition for 4 stringed instruments. It was inspired by the Beethoven quartet you heard at the beginning, the string quartet in A minor, opus 132, which is also divided into 5 movements. I'll be saying a bit more about Beethoven's quartet later. My theme today is religion and poetry in T.S. Eliot, or in the work of T.S. Eliot. But this is a big subject, so I'll need to narrow it down. I'm going to concentrate on the 4 quartets, widely regarded as Eliot's greatest achievement, including by Eliot himself. But even this is a large area, so all I can hope to do is highlight a few themes and draw a few lessons. First, I'm going to say a little about Eliot the man. We are a Unitarian denomination, and it's important to know that Eliot's family came from the heart of Unitarianism in Boston, in Massachusetts. Eliot liked to joke that his family's relationship to Unitarianism in America was like that of the Borgias to the papacy. However, Eliot himself was born in St. Louis in Missouri in 1888, where his grandfather, William Greenleaf Eliot, had moved in the early 1800s as a Unitarian missionary to what was then the frontier. Eliot's father became a successful businessman in St. Louis, a manufacturer of bricks, and his son, Thomas Stearns Eliot, grew up here, but with regular summer trips back to visit family and to the summer home in New England, that northeastern corner of the United States. It's worth saying immediately that T.S. Eliot rejected Unitarianism early, aged 18 or 19. At the time, he began a lifelong religious quest, which was to see him join the Church of England as an Anglo-Catholic 20 years later in England in 1927. So why did he reject the Unitarian faith? Well, the young Eliot was fascinated by some of the extremities of religion, like sacrifice and sainthood, and he regarded Unitarianism as lukewarm, as a religion concerned with outward form, with right behavior, rather than the inner soul, with all its trials and torments. Of course, his criticism was of the Unitarianism he saw around him. He did admire Unitarian rebels, such as the writer Ralph Waldo Emerson and his transcendentalism. But it's clear that Eliot would never have been happy within any kind of Unitarianism. His personality was of a radically different cast. He had regard for a few American writers, but he felt none came close to the great 14th century Italian poet Dante Alighieri, whose explorations of the heights and depths of experience, of heaven and hell, profoundly influenced him. Eliot sensed in the early 1900s, as a student at Harvard, that the coming century was to be deeply secular and materialistic, at least in the West. His art can be seen as an assault on this mentality, as he tries to make us aware of realities beyond those which can be seen and measured. He chose to pursue his art on the continent and then in England, where he settled, away from his family, resisting the lure of a Harvard professorship in philosophy. As is obvious from the poetry, he was highly educated. Eliot's new biographer, Robert Crawford, has pointed out that for his doctoral thesis on time at Harvard, Eliot studied the Buddhist and Hindu scriptures, reading the Puntajali in Pali, the Upanishads in Sanskrit. He read the philosopher Henri Bergson in French and then in English. He read Kant in German, Dante in Italian, Spinoza in Latin, and Heraclitus in Greek. Robert Crawford comments that Eliot was the most strenuously educated of all 20th century poets. So what about his four quartets? These four poems, long poems, written from the 1930s, the mid-1930s, completed in the early 1940s. Those four poems. The four are entitled Burnt Norton, East Coker, The Dry Salvages, and Little Gidding. The first, Burnt Norton, opens with Eliot in dry philosophic mode. It's hard to get into. It seems a series of riddles. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. So what does that mean? However difficult, these lines introduce the main themes of four quartets: the relationship between past, present, and future, how we are imprisoned in a time-bound reality, with redemption perhaps possible, while our past and even what might have been remains with us in our memories. And then the pace and the mood begin to change. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls echo in the memory, down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened, into the rose garden. Hints of experiences, real but also unrealized. Quoting again, other echoes inhabit the garden. Shall we follow? Eliot invites us into this world of memory and imagination, this world of might have been. The language tantalizing, vivid yet dreamlike. Quick, said the bird, find them, round the corner, through the first gate, into our first world. Shall we follow the deception of the thrush into our first world? But what of the experience that he hints at? And where is Burnt Norton anyway? Well, each of the four quartets is about a real place. 3 of them in England and 1 in America. A real place where Eliot had a profound, usually mystical experience. Burnt Norton is a manor house in Gloucestershire, which the poet visited in the mid-1930s with one of his closest friends, a visiting American and Bostonian, Emily Hale. She was in love with Tom, as family and friends called Eliot. And for much of his life, Eliot seems to have been in love with Emily Hale. She was in many ways his poetic muse. In the gardens of Burnt Norton, he had an experience of the transcendent, which he tries to put into words, perhaps nowhere more powerfully than in the second movement of Burnt Norton, which will be read for us by Gillian.
At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards, at the still point, there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement. And do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance, and there is only the dance. I can only say, there we have been, but I cannot say where. And I cannot say how long, for that is to place it in time. The inner freedom from the practical desire, the release from action and suffering, release from the inner and the outer compulsion, yet surrounded by a grace of sense, a white light still and moving, erhebung without motion, concentration without elimination, both a new world and the old made explicit, understood in the completion of its partial ecstasy. the resolution of its partial horror, yet the enchainment of past and future woven in the weakness of the changing body, protects mankind from heaven and damnation, which flesh cannot endure. Time past and time future allow but a little consciousness. To be conscious is not to be in time, but only in time can the moment in the rose garden, the moment in the arbour where the rain beat, the moment in the draughty church at Smokefall be remembered, involved with past and future. Only through time is conquered.
Eliot writes here of transcending time-bound reality, of reaching a moment outside time, of profound insight or beauty, of revelation, achieved not through flight, but through going so deeply into time that we reach its very center, its essence, the mathematical still point around which the whole world revolves, but which itself does not turn the still point, and therefore is not part of time, certainly not diurnal time. In this timeless moment, he cannot say how long or where he felt release, surrounded by a grace of sense, a white light still and moving, and both the new world and the old were made explicit. Eliot has already warned, humankind cannot bear very much reality. And this glimpse of the eternal that he gives us, conveys to us, can only be remembered and imperfectly understood when back in normal time. Time protects us from the ultimate realities, heaven and damnation, which flesh cannot endure. Eliot believed in heaven and hell, maybe not as places, but absolutely real nonetheless. He believed, too, in sin and evil and our need for redemption. By the mid-1930s, Eliot was estranged from his mentally ill wife, Vivian, and was racked by guilt. He had an intense experience with Emily Hale in those gardens, but his love for her faded. His family always expected him to marry Emily, but he never did, even after his wife was committed to a mental institution in 1938 and after his wife's death in 1947. The poet in Burnt Norton goes on to describe a twilight world of disaffection, not one of escape, but trapped in time, the inhabitants distracted from distraction by distraction, empty of meaning. Real understanding must be gained another way. Descend lower, the poet writes, into the depths, including of perpetual solitude. This way of deprivation is one way to enlightenment, while the other is the same, not in movement, but abstention from movement. In the fifth section or movement of Burnt Norton, Eliot describes his battle to convey meaning through words. But the words, he writes, strain, break under the burden. Words have decayed through imprecision. Eliot writes of his need to venture beyond where words can take him, and he senses the same struggle in Beethoven, in that string quartet in A minor, opus 132. It was composed, the Beethoven Quartet, in 1825 when Beethoven was completely deaf. The third movement of the quartet, of the string quartet, composed during recovery from illness, is entitled A Convalescent's Sacred Song of Thanks to the Godhead. Eliot says Beethoven was striving to express that which went beyond music. And he had, said Eliot, created a kind of heavenly gaiety. We're now going to hear the opening part of that third movement from the Beethoven Quartet. The second of the four quartets is called East Coker. I'm not going to spend quite as long on it as I did on the first quartet, you'll be glad to know, or on the next two after this. East Coker is named after a village in Somerset where Eliot's ancestors migrated from in the 17th century, migrated to the United States as part of the Pilgrim Exodus from religious persecution. Eliot returning to the village to see it in the 1930s, as he approaches, the poet sees a vision of the past. In an open field, people are dancing around a fire in his vision. And now from East Coker. In that open field, if you do not come too close, if you do not come too close, on a summer midnight, you can hear the music of the weak pipe and the little drum, and see them dancing around the bonfire, the association of man and woman, in dancing, signifying matrimony, a dignified and commodious sacrament. Two and two, necessary conjunction, holding each other by the hand or the arm, which betokeneth concord. Round and round the fire, leaping through the flames, or joined in circles, rustically solemn or in rustic laughter, lifting heavy feet in clumsy shoes, earth feet, loam feet, lifted in country mirth, mirth of those long since under the earth, nourishing the corn. Keeping time, keeping the rhythm in their dancing, as in their living in the living seasons. The time of the seasons and the constellations, the time of milking and the time of harvest, the time of the coupling of man and woman, and that of beasts. Feet rising and falling, eating and drinking, dung and death. Dawn points, and another day prepares for heat and silence. Out at sea, the dawn wind wrinkles and slides. I am here, or there, or elsewhere, in my beginning. In the passage we've just heard, the poet describes those dancers from the past as keeping time, keeping the rhythm in their dancing as in the living seasons. But the time-bound circularity of that rural past becomes more and more oppressive, until, as you heard, feet rising and falling, eating and drinking, dung and death. And then a new start, new possibilities, a new language. Dawn points, and another day prepares for heat and silence. Out at sea, the dawn wind wrinkles and slides. The sense of freedom out on that vast ocean suggests the voyage to the new world that Eliot's ancestors made. But perhaps more strongly, it suggests the freedom of our present age, where all seems possible. And where is the poet in this, he asks? Here, there, or elsewhere? At the end of East Coker, Eliot describes how wisdom can develop with age. The ideal now found, not in the intense moment with no before and after, those moments out of time he wrote of earlier, but rather through a lifetime burning in every moment, being fully alive in each moment, yet fully attuned to both past and future. This was an awareness that Eliot sought all his life, his vision of the perfect life. The third quartet, the Dry Salvages, is dominated by the theme of water, and Eliot returns to the America of his childhood, where the great Mississippi River flows through his hometown of St. Louis.
I do not know much about gods, but I think the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable. Patient to some degree, at first recognized as a frontier, useful, untrustworthy as a conveyor of commerce, then only a problem confronting the builder of bridges. The problem once solved, the brown god is almost forgotten by the dwellers in the cities. Ever, however implacable, keeping the seasons and rages, destroyer, reminder of what men choose to forget. Unhonoured, unpropitiated by worshippers of the machine, but waiting, watching and waiting. His rhythm was present in the nursery bedroom, in the rank ailanthus of the April dooryard, in the smell of grapes on the autumn table, and the evening circle in the winter gaslight. The river is within us. The sea is all about us. The sea is the land's edge also, the granite into which it reaches, the beaches where it tosses its hints of earlier and other creation, the starfish, the horseshoe crab, the whale's backbone, the pools where it offers to our curiosity the more delicate algae and the sea anemone. It tosses up our losses, the torn seine, the shattered lobster pot, the broken oar, and the gear of foreign dead men. The sea has many voices, many gods, and many voices. The salt is on the briar rose, the fog is in the fir trees. The sea howl and the sea yelp are different voices, often together heard, the whine in the rigging, the menace and caress of wave that breaks on water, the distant rote in the granite teeth, and the wailing warning from the approaching headland are all sea voices, and the heaving groaner rounded homewards, and the seagull, and under the oppression of the silent fog, the tolling bell. Measures time, not our time, wrung by the unhurried groundswell, a time older than the time of chronometers, older than time counted by anxious, worried women lying awake, calculating the future, trying to unweave, unwind, unravel, and piece together the past and the future. Between midnight and dawn, when the past is all deception, the future futureless, before the morning watch, when time stops and time is never ending, and the groundswell that is and was from the beginning clangs the bell.
As you heard in that first movement of the Dry Salvages, the Mississippi River, Eliot writes, is a strong brown god. It can appear tamed, but ever, however, implacable, keeping his seasons and rages, destroyer, reminder of what men choose to forget. Then to Eliot's other childhood on the New England coast at Cape Ann, where the sea tosses up hints of earlier and other creation. The sea has many voices, many gods and many voices. For fishermen and sailors, the tolling bell of the ship measures time, not our time, rung by the unhurried groundswell. And the dangers ever present, the sharp rocks off Cape Ann, known as the Dry Salvages. In the fifth and final movement of the Dry Salvages, Eliot makes clear he, like most of us, cannot live at the point where time and the timeless intersect. That is an occupation for the saint in a lifetime of love and self-surrender. He, Eliot, must content himself with the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, with hints and guesses. Now from the Dry Salvages, the fifth movement. But to apprehend the point of intersection of the timeless with time is an occupation for the saint. No occupation either, but something given and taken in a lifetime's death in love. Ardor and selflessness and self-surrender. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit, lost in a shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or the music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all. But you are the music while the music lasts. These are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses. And the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood, is incarnation. In that passage, the transcendent beauty of those unattended moments is powerfully conveyed. The shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, the winter lightning, and the music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all. But you are the music while the music lasts. These glimpses of the eternity are merely, says Eliot, hints and guesses. For the rest, our work is within time: prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. But, Eliot concedes, those hints half-guessed are still incarnation, when the eternal, the divine, enters the human, becomes fused with it. We humans become one with the eternal, even in those brief moments of transcendence. And the last quartet, Little Gidding, brings us back to England. Little Gidding takes its name from the remote spot north of Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire, where a religious community was founded in the 17th century by Nicholas Ferrer, living by poverty, discipline, and prayer. During the English Civil War in the 1640s, the community gave refuge to Charles I. The little chapel was later ransacked by Cromwell's men, the organ and pulpit ripped out and burned. In the mid-1930s, Eliot visited Little Gidding, where a religious community had been re-established and the chapel in use again. Eliot began writing the poem later when he was serving as a fire warden in London during the Second World War, during the Blitz. And he saw London burning below him. And Eliot draws the parallels with the time of the English Civil War 300 years earlier. War, fire, destruction, bravery, fortitude, faith. He describes his approach to Little Gidding, and then once in the little chapel that had survived from the 17th century. You are not here to verify, instruct yourself, or inform curiosity. You are here to kneel where prayer has been valid. Through religious observance and discipline, in both past and present, meaning is realized. History and the moment intersect. The major themes are brought together in the magnificent finale of Little Gidding, in the fifth movement. Eliot turns back farther than the English Civil War to the 14th century English mystic Dame Julian of Norwich. In the dark and momentous days of the Second World War, history is now and England. But also, in Julian's words, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well. And here meaning and purpose are found not simply by the individual, but by the community of which Eliot was a vital part. And the end of all our exploring, to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Why? Because we have been transformed by our journey.
What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. And every phrase and sentence that is right, where every word is at home, taking its place to support the others. The word neither diffident nor ostentatious, an easy commerce of the old and the new. The common word, exact, without vulgarity. The formal word, precise, but not pedantic. The complete consort dancing together. Every phrase and every sentence is an end and a beginning. Every poem is an epitaph. And any action is a step to the block, to the fire, down the sea's throat, or to an illegible stone. And that is where we start. We die with the dying. See, they depart, and we go with them. We are born with the dead. See, they return and bring us with them. The moment of the rose and the moment of the yew tree are of equal duration. A people without history is not redeemed from time, for history is a pattern of timeless moments. So while the light fails on a winter's afternoon in a secluded chapel, history is now and England. With the drawing of this love and the voice of this calling, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea. Quick now, here, now, always, a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well, when the tongues of flame are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one.
Eliot, while striving for the perfect life, was tormented by his failings, and it was only in his last 8 years that he was to enjoy happiness in love before his death in 1965. This was in his second marriage to Valerie, 38 years his junior. T.S. Eliot conveys heights and depths of religious experience that few of us are likely to know. Even if he never achieved his ideal, it was the journey that counted. Eliot the Puritan, the pioneer, the missionary, venturing to the frontiers of knowledge and experience. I think we can see elements of Unitarianism remaining in Eliot. His high-mindedness, his strong public-spiritedness, the moral rectitude, but perhaps most of all, in his breadth, drawing on Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christian mysticism, as he does in this poem. But Eliot's religious sensibilities, as I said earlier, ran to extremes. He was attracted to sainthood and martyrdom. He practiced self-denial and was racked by his sinfulness. The Unitarian faith is not one of extremes, but none of us should ignore the heights and depths of religious experience. In fact, reaching into the deepest human emotions is perhaps what all of us involved in religion, in spirituality, in literature, and the arts are striving for. And if we can achieve and sustain this, then we too will be able to say with Gillian of Norwich, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well.